Welcome to Sufi Voices. I'm Wafa, and as Rumi says, out beyond all notions of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field and I'll meet you there. I look forward to connecting with you every week to expand our hearts and learn about the universal language of love. Welcome to a wonderful new edition of Sufi Voices. I'm so happy to be with you today because we're going to talk about birds. Yes, birds. Why birds? Because since I've been in this wonderful Canadian wilderness for the past 2.5 months, I have been observing nature so patiently and so attentively. And spring is definitely bird time. From the robin, the red-breast robin, who has been coming and pecking at our windows, to the blue jays, to the crows, to the ducks in the lake. The place is full of these amazing birds. Woodpeckers, wherever I walk, I hear them pick, 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 pick in the forest. So we're going to hear what do the Sufis and Rumi and Hafiz and Hafiz Attar, who are the three main sources of this program today, tell us about birds. Well, first of all, Rumi says, I want to sing like the birds sing, not worrying about who hears or what they think. What a beautiful, freeing thought. And then he says, tie 2 birds together, they will not be able to fly, even though they now have 4 wings. I wonder, what does he mean by tying 2 birds together? Food for thought, as usual with the great master. He also says, birds make great sky circles of their freedom. How do they learn it? They fall, and falling, they're given wings. Yes, it's only by falling and then standing up again that we are given the courage to continue our way. I agree. And then he also says, never be without remembrance of him, for his remembrance gives strength and wings to the bird of the spirit. Your hand opens and closes, opens and closes. If it were always a fist or always stretched open, you would be paralyzed. Your deepest presence is in every small contracting and expanding, as beautifully balanced and coordinated as birds' wings. What a beautiful way to think about how we progress in life. Contracting, expanding, contracting, expanding. Thank you, Rumi. A strange passion is moving in my head. My heart has become a bird which searches in the sky, he writes. Every part of me goes in different directions. Is it really so that the one I love is everywhere? Yes, I think that the one you love is everywhere. He is our creator. And then he says, a beautiful, beautiful reflection about the time him and Shams of Tabriz were together. He says, a moment of happiness. You and I sitting on the veranda, apparently two, but one in soul, you and I. We feel the flowing water of life, here, you and I, with the garden's beauty and the birds singing. The stars will be watching us, and we will show them what it is to be a thin crescent moon. You and I, unselfed, will be together, indifferent to idle speculation. You and I, the parrots of heaven, will be cracking sugar as we laugh together. You and I, in one form upon this earth, and in another form in a timeless, sweet land. One of my favorite quotes by Rumi is when he says, "I'm a bird of God's garden, and I do not belong to this dusty world. For a day or two they have put me here in this cage of my own body. I did not come here of my own. I will not return of my own to my own country." I really like the image of the cage of the body. And then he says, "No more words. In the name of this place, we drink in with our breathing. Stay quiet like a flower, so the night birds will start singing." And then, when the rose is gone and the garden faded, you will no longer hear the nightingale's song. The beloved is all, the lover just a veil. The beloved is living, the lover a dead thing. I love, if love withholds its strengthening care, the lover is left like a bird without care. The lover is left like a bird without wings. How will I be awake and aware if the light of the beloved is absent? Love wills that this word be brought forth. True, how will I be awake and aware if the light of the beloved is absent? Thank you, Rumi. Maybe Rumi was thinking of conventional marriages when he wrote, "Each has to enter the nest made by the other imperfect bird," or when he also said, "The feelings trembled and flapped in his chest like a bird newly put in a cage." But then he writes, "Like the birds of the sea, men come from the ocean of the soul. How could this bird, born from that sea, make his dwelling here? O bird of my soul, fly away now, for I possess 100 fortified towers." And then, maybe in his old age, he wrote, "Physical existence is so cramped. We grow old and bent over like embryos. 9 months pass. It is time to be born. The lamb wants to graze green daylight. There are ways of being born twice, of coming to where you fly, not individually like birds, but as the sun moves with his bride, with sincerity." are mentioned several times in the Quran in a variety of contexts. They appeared to Abraham, Joseph, Solomon, David, and even Jesus. So I thought you'd like to hear a little bit about how they did so. The story of Abraham in the Quran is mentioned in Surah 260. Apparently, it's one of the most read stories because it touches who want to know how it is that Allah gives life to the dead. So apparently, according to Surah 260, Abraham asks, "My Lord, show me how you give life to the dead." And the Lord answered, "Do you not believe?" Abraham said, "I do, but this is so my heart may be calm." The Lord answered, "Then take 4 birds and draw them to you. Then place a part of them on each mountain. Then call them. They shall come to you in a rush. And know that indeed Allah is overpowering and all-wise." Now the interpretation of this verse apparently is that Allah had asked the Prophet Abraham to cut a bird into 4 and place them on 4 different mountains. But when Abraham calls to them, Allah causes their parts to be rejoined and refilled with pulse and life. So when these birds fly back, no sign that they had just been dismembered. This way God shows his prophet how he gives life to the dead. Abraham did not have doubt. He wanted to know how Allah gives life to the dead, and that's how Allah showed him. One of Jesus' miracle in the Quran involves a bird. And in the Quran, Jesus is one of the prophets. He is not the Son of God as in the Christian tradition. So in Surah 510, it is said, Allah said, "O Jesus, son of Maryam," Mary in Arabic, "remember my grace upon you and upon your mother when I aided you with the Holy Spirit so that you may speak to people in the cradle and as a grown man. And I taught you the book and the wisdom and the Torah and the gospel. And you created out of mud a bird-like figure by my permission. Then you blew into it. Thus it became a bird by my permission." So basically in the Quran, one of the miracles bestowed upon Jesus by Allah is taking a clump of clay and shaping it into the form of a bird. Now, another prophet that is mentioned in the Quran in conjunction with a bird is Solomon, and the bird is the hoopoe, one of my absolute favorite creatures. It is a bird that is mythical, and it has a kind of crest on top of its head, and it's mentioned more than in the Quran. It's mentioned by Farid ad-Din al-Attar as the leader in the Conference of the Words, but we will come to it in a later time in this program. Now, according to the Quran, verse 27:16, apparently Solomon, son of David, was taught the utterance of bird, and he has been given of everything. This is a manifest favor from Allah. Then it says, there was one bird that was specially noted, and it was a hoopoe. Hoopoes are a family of birds that have long, thin beaks and a crested head. Now the hoopoe in Solomon's court was his personal messenger. And once Solomon, reviewing his birds, said, "Why do I not see the hoopoe? Or is he absent? I shall surely punish him severely or slay him, or he must come to me with a clear excuse. But the hoopoe was long in coming, and eventually it said, I found out what you have not apprehended, Solomon, and I come to you from Sheba with tidings. That is mentioned in Quran 27:20-22. The hoopoe reported to Solomon that it came across a kingdom ruled by a powerful and wealthy woman, the Queen of Sheba, who had a magnificent throne, but she and her people, as the hoopoe reported, bowed to the sun in worship, and that disturbed Solomon. So Solomon sent a letter with the hoopoe to give the queen, inviting her and her people to worship the one and true God, Allah. All of this happened through the hoopoe. Ultimately, according to the Quran, Sheba renounced the worship of the sun and joined Solomon in the worship of the God, the true God, Allah. But this story became a myth and became so popular in the imagination of people and musicians. You've got Handel, the Queen of Sheba. You've got amazing stories about that mythical or maybe real queen, because Sheba in Arabic is called Saba, who came and visited Solomon, and some even say had a child with him. I leave that to you. When my new book comes out in September, there's a whole chapter on the Queen of Sheba. Watch that space. There are several verses in the Quran which ask David and the birds to glorify God. Verse 27:79 says, we subjugated the mountains and the birds to give glory along with David. And then verse 34:10 says, and indeed we gave David a great favor from us. O mountains and birds, repeat with him my praises. And then finally, verse 38:18-19 says, and we subjugated the mountains to give glory to God along with David in the evenings and at sunrise, and in the birds in assembly. What a wonderful, wonderful set of verses. I hope you agree. Even more interesting surah is that of Al-Hajj 22:31, which says, and he who associates with Allah, it is as though he had fallen from the sky and was snatched by the birds or the wind, carrying him down into a remote place. Now, basically, the imagery of being snatched by a bird is very beautiful, because birds in general don't get tired easily. They have energy, they have spirit, they have freshness, they have a liveliness, they have a desire to fly. They are remarkable animals hovering between the earth and the sky. And also, birds are creatures that inspire us to look high and not to give up. And often in the Quran, it is birds who are compared to ants. Working, saving, instead of flying, soaring, discovering. So there's this contrast between the ant and the birds. And the birds are the ones we need to emulate ourselves on. A favorite bird in all Middle Eastern literature, whether it's Turkish, Arabic or Persian, is the bulbul. The bulbul in Arabic is the nightingale. so many love poems mention the bulbul and how he is the one singing for lovers. And of course, one of my absolute favorite Sufi poets, Hafiz, has something to say about the bulbul and about spring and all its flowers. He says, "Spring and all its flowers now joyously break their vow of silence. It is time for celebration, not for lying low. You too, weed out those roots of sadness from your heart. The Sabah wind arrives, and in deep resonance, the flower passionately rips open its garments, thrusting itself from itself. The way of truth, learn from the clarity of water. Learn freedom from the spreading grass. Pay close attention to the artistry of the Sabah wind that wafts in pollen from afar and ripples the beautiful tresses of the fields of hyacinth flowers. From the privacy of the harem, the virgin bud slips out, revealing herself under the morning star, branding your heart and your faith with beauty. And the frenzied bulbul, the nightingale, flies madly out of the house of sadness to unite with all the flowers, its love-crazed cry like 1,000 trumpet blasts. Hafiz says, and the experienced old one concurs, all you really need is to tell those stories of the fair ones and the goblet of wine. And by the way, the Sabah wind is the wind at sunrise that comes from the east. Traditionally, lovers confide their secrets to the Sabah wind, and poets associate the Sabah wind with the breath of the beloved, with the breath of God coming from the east. It is the first whisper of daylight and of spiritual enlightenment. It carries the perfumed promise of the new day. It is a messenger of awakening. It's a subtle, playful, and revealing messenger. And this beautiful translation was done by Humayun Taba and Marguerite Théophile. And if you need to look up that poem, it is entitled Spring and All Its Flowers by Hafiz. We cannot have a program on birds without mentioning Farid ad-Din al-Attar's epic poem, The Conference of the Birds. Poem first published in 1077 and consisting of more than 4,500 lines is concerned about how to seek and find true divine love and knowledge through direct personal experience with God. It is the poem of Sufism. The hoopoe, known as the wisest and most enlightened birds, as we heard before in the Quran, leads the group on their journey through the 7 valleys to meet the Simurg. The relationship between the hoopoe and the other birds is an allegory of a Sufi sheikh guiding his pupils along the path to enlightenment. And the obstacle encountered by the birds, many obstacles on their journey through the 7 valleys, describes the stages encountered by the Sufis to find God. Eventually, the birds reach the court of the Simurg and attain enlightenment. But the great Simurg is not the mythical bird they expect to find. After many, many adventures and stories, the birds reach the great court of the Simurgh. When they reach the court, the hoopoe guides them to a lake, where they see the Simurgh in their own reflections. They understand that the great Simurgh was the divine leadership they were seeking. It was within them all along, because the name Simurgh in Persian means 30 and Murgh means bird. 30 birds. They were all along the masters they were looking for. They were the leaders they were looking for. Now, of course, when they were going on that quest to find the Simurgh, they go through many transformation. The hoopoe addresses each of the birds' hesitations, fears, vanities and questions with parables and anecdotes to counter their individual concerns. The birds adopt the hoopoe as their leader, and the hoopoe describes the 7 valleys they must cross in order to reach the great Simurgh's court. And the valleys are the valley of the quest, the valley of love, the valley of insight into mystery, the valley of detachment, the valley of unity, the valley of bewilderment, and finally the valley of poverty and nothingness. Many of the birds are distressed by the hoopoe's words, and some of them die on the way, but those who reach the court of the Simurgh at the end understand a deep lesson. They must cast aside all dogma, belief and unbelief to open their minds to infinite possibilities. When they continue through the valley of love, they must abandon reason and embrace passionate love with a full heart. When they reach the valley of insight into mystery, they must accept the uselessness of worldly knowledge and open their minds to a new way of thinking. In the valley of detachment, which is the 4th valley, all worldly desires and attachments must be relinquished, and assumption of the nature of reality must vanish. The valley of unity asks the birds to realize that everything is connected and that we are all one, that the divine power of the beloved of God is beyond everything they know. And eventually they continue to the valley of bewilderment, where they are perplexed and in awe of the beloved, which makes them realize that everything they knew before this point was meaningless. Finally, in the valley of poverty and nothingness, their self, their ego disappears into the universe, and they are no longer confined by linear time. Instead, they exist both in the past and in the future. Of course, many birds perish along the journey, and only 30 birds remain. 30 meaning sea, and birds meaning being Murgh. Sea Murgh. Last year, we spent several months reading from the Conference of the Bird, but I don't think it sank into my mind how multi-layered this whole poem was. But just to remind you of the beauty of this long 4,500 lines poems, I would like to read the beginning and the end of it, as written by Farid ad-Din al-Attar, this amazing Sufi master who preceded Rumi and who, it is said, Rumi admired very much. Attar writes, "Dear Hoopoe, welcome, you will be our guide. It was on you King Solomon relied to carry messages between his court and distant Sheba's lovely queen. He knew your language and you knew his heart. As his close confidant, you learnt the art of holding demons captive underground, and for these valiant exploits you were crowned." And trying to encourage the birds to come on the journey with him, the Hoopoe says, "Your heart is congealed like ice. When will you free yourself from cowardice? Since you have such a short time to live here, what difference does it make? What should you fear? The world is filth and sin, and homeless men must enter it and homeless leave again. They die as worms in squalid pain. If we must perish in this quest, that certainly is better than a life of filth and grief. If this great search is in vain, if my belief is groundless, it is right that I should die. So many errors throng the world, then why should we not risk this quest? To suffer blame for love is better than a life of shame. No one has reached this goal, so why appeal to those whose blindness claims it is unreal? I'd rather die deceived by dreams than give my heart to home and trade and never live. We've been and heard so much. What have we learned? Not for one moment has the self been spurned. Fools gather round and hinder our release. When will their stale, insistent whining cease? We have no freedom to achieve our goal until from self and fools we free the soul. To be admitted past the veil, you must be dead to all what the crowd considers just. Once past the veil, you understand the way from which the crowd's courtiers blindly stray. If you have any will, leave these stories and even the search for hidden glories. The fruit of love's great tree is poverty. Whoever knows this knows humility. When love has pitched his tent in someone's breast, that man despairs of life and knows no rest. Love's pain will murder him and blandly asks a surgeon's fee for managing the task. The water that he drinks brings pain. His bread is turned to blood immediately shed. Though he is weak, faint, feebler than an ant, love forces him to be her combatant. He cannot take one mouthful unaware that he is floundering in a sea of care. Sound a little bit complicated, well, you must remember that they were written between 1145 and 1220 when Attar died. Attar died age about 74, 75. He was born in Nishapur in now modern day Iran, but at the time it was Persia. And he wrote, and he was called Attar because Attar in Arabic means perfume. So he was probably a perfumer as well as a poet. But the most important thing about Attar, other than his amazing Conference of the Birds, is that Rumi himself admired him tremendously. He said about him, Attar travelled through all the 7 cities of love, while I, Rumi, I am only at the bend of the first alley. And not just Rumi, but Hafiz absolutely admired him, and Jami'. And he has actually a memorial in his Nishapur, a mausoleum of Attar that one can visit.
In my mind, foreign lands, full of lines on my hands, tasted earth, touched the skies, swam the pools of my eyes. People talked in their fear, rumors always whispered here. Where and why, from what shore, what was I searching for? You can call me worship, you can call me follower, but I'm just a wanderer in search of my lover. You can call it foolish, a kind of madness, but I'm just a wanderer in search of my lover. Pushed and pulled through these worlds, winding roads, crossed and curved, pain and love, hope and fear, in between, all unclear. Drunk on time, spin my thoughts, states of mind, turning doors. Ask me now who I am, turn your back, take my hand. You can call me worship, you can call me follower, but I'm just a wanderer in search of my lover. You can call it foolish, a kind of madness, but I'm just a wanderer in search of my lover. There's a fire calling me, burning me, leading me into ecstasy. There's a fire calling me, burning me, leading me into ecstasy. There's a fire worshiping me, you can call me following me, but I'm just a wanderer in search of my ecstasy. There's a fire calling me, a kind of madness, but I'm just a wanderer in search of my ecstasy. There's a fire calling me, you can call me follower, but I'm just a wanderer in search of my ecstasy. There's a fire foolish, kind of madness, but I'm just a wanderer in search of my lover.
This was the amazing Sami Yusuf and his new album, Wanderer. I love his music. It's getting better and better every single time I listen to it. Now, our story today is not by me. It's by and about Rumi and the caged bird. Apparently, Rumi visited a small village as he passed through on his way to Baghdad. All the people gathered where the well stood in the center of the square of the town to hear the saint recite his story. So beautiful were his words and his love of God that many were moved to tears. After Rumi had finished speaking, several came forward and offered him refreshment, which he gratefully received. Then the villagers began to disperse, returning to their daily task. But a merchant approached Rumi and said, Master Rumi, I wish to ask you for a favor. My favorite possession is my bird, but her wing and her head droop every day, and no longer is my house filled with her sweet song. I have brought medicine and healthy food, yet nothing seems to banish my bird's illness. Will you come to my house and see this bird?" So Rumi agreed. Rumi had seen into the man's heart. He found out that it was hardened like a stone, for the merchant was desirous only of his own gain. "This man's heart is imprisoned in a cage," thought Rumi. But he agreed to the request and followed the merchant to his house, which was easy to spot since it was the largest and most lavish house in the village. The merchant led the saint into a large room, and there by the window stood a beautiful cage with a beautiful bird inside. True to the merchant's words, the bird appeared lifeless. He appeared ill. Then Rumi began to sing a song, and his youthful, soothing words fell upon the ears of the bird. First it began to twitter, then it began to join its voice to the melody of the saint. Then it let off abruptly and returned to its former state of stillness. Rumi said to the merchant, "Your bird is unhappy because it longs for its freedom." To which the merchant replied, "I will give the bird anything that it asks, for that is within my power, but I cannot grant its freedom. I am travelling tomorrow for India, and I will return in 40 days. Ask the bird if there is something that I can bring to it from its homeland." Rumi whispered quietly to the bird, who immediately began to flap its wings and burst into a short song. The merchant was overjoyed to see his favourite possession restored to health. Then Rumi told the merchant that the bird would be fully restored if he to do the following. While he was in India, he should visit the nearby forest where birds similar to his own live, and announce to them that one of their sisters is captive in his home. The merchant was somewhat puzzled with this instruction, but delighted that his bird would greet him again with a song. So Rumi continued on his way to Baghdad. In fact, Rumi was looking for his beloved Shams, who had disappeared suddenly from Konya, and he went along a long journey looking for him. Several weeks later, when the merchant was in India and feeling a sudden longing for home and his beautiful bird, he remembered Rumi's instructions and hurried out to the nearby forest. There, high among the boughs and filling the trees with their songs, were the sister of his birds. "Oh, that I had a dozen of these wonderful creatures filling my house with their melodies," he thought. And then, in a loud voice, he announced, "One of your sisters lives captive in a cage at my home." No sooner had the merchant spoken these words than one of the wild birds fell senseless to the ground from one of the tree branches. For a moment the merchant was shaken by the sight of the bird's sudden death, but then hurried back to his business at the city where he was staying. When he returned home to this village and entered his house, he was puzzled to see that illness had once again returned to his precious bird. "What is this?" he exclaimed. "I have followed the saint's instructions." He then approached the cage and, speaking softly to his beloved bird, of the misfortune he had encountered in the forest. "I have sad news for you, my dear. For when I told the others of your captivity, one of your sisters fell immediately to the ground, dead." As soon as these words were spoken, the bird collapsed and fell to the bottom of the cage. The merchant was aghast. "What misfortune is this? Now my bird is dead too!" he exclaimed. Sorrowfully, he took the bird out of the cage and placed it by the window-sill. At once the bird revived, flew out of the window, and perched on a branch far out of reach of the merchant. "What is the meaning of this?" he cried. Then, through the power bestowed by the Rumi, either upon the heart of the man or upon the tongue of the bird, it began to speak to the merchant, and the merchant could understand its language. "You brought not sad news to me, merchant, but the way to my freedom," said the bird. "For my forest sister showed me by her action what I had to do in order to free myself. O man, may your heart be set free to fly from the cage of your greed before it perishes in its captivity." Then the bird flew away, free at last. It is time to join Rumi's Daughter by Muriel Mofroy and see what's happening in that household after that famous concert. We are now in chapter 17. She writes, "Dawn was breaking, slowly bringing back to life the various objects in the room. The single rose in the vase on the windowsill, the piece of embroidered silk on the wall, and next to her bed, on the stool, the icon of the Virgin Mary, which Evdokia, her mother, had given her some 6 years ago. Outside, in the acacia tree, the birds were still holding their morning meeting in a flurry of chattering, which made the silence in the house even more tangible. She took a deep breath. And that was Kimya we're talking about. Kimya, who is the adopted daughter of Rumi. And she was going to get up when she heard the footsteps outside her door, followed by Sultan Walad's voice. Sultan Walad is one of Rumi's children. "No, father, I have not seen him." There was an unusual note of worry in his voice. Then she heard Kara, Rumi's wife, saying, "Perhaps he went out for an early walk." "This is a possibility, of course," Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi's voice sounded tired and doubtful. Kimya dressed quickly, then went straight to the kitchen, where she found Kara, her adoptive mother, bent over the hearth, reviving the fire. "You've heard," Kara said, turning her head towards Kimya. She didn't say any more. "Shams is gone," Kimya said. There was no doubt in her mind about it. Shams would not be found. "How is Maulana?" she asked. "He went out with Sultan Walad in search of news," Kara said, instead of an answer. Next to her, Alim was playing with the wing feathers of the chicken they'd had for supper the previous evening. "I'm a bird. "I can fly," he said, stretching his arms with the feathers in each hand. Kimya laughed. "Are you sure, Alim? You know, chickens don't fly very high." "I'm not a chicken," Alim was indignant. "I'm an eagle, and eagles fly high." "So they do," she said. And for a second, the image of Shams flying over Konya passed through her mind as she remembered the conversation only a few weeks ago when we had talked of red and green doves. And now she wondered, had Shams flown back to Tabriz? For Shams was not a dove. He had huge wings that could spread over you and protect you, wings that could also, if he wished, take him away to the other end of the world. The memory of that conversation was so vivid that for a second it was as if Shams were here sitting beside her. She gave a start when Alim, who still held the chicken feathers in his hand, came running towards her. "You see, I can fly," he said. At that moment, Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi entered, followed by Sultan Walad. "Have you heard anything?" Kara inquired. Her husband shook his head. He looked shocked and was pale. "Not much," Sultan said. "No one has seen Shams. A Christian monk told us he saw a tall man walking out of the main gate early this morning before dawn, but he didn't see the man's face. It was still too dark." Maulana sat down heavily, 2 tears running down his cheeks. "He has gone," he murmured. "The sun has gone," because sun in Arabic means Shams, and it was true. The house had fallen into darkness, buried under the veil of morning. Days passed. Everyone in Konya knew that Shams had left the city. "He has gone at last," Maulana's students rejoiced. "Now things will come back to normal. Now Maulana will teach us again. Soon he will forget Shams and all that madness." Kimya listened again and again, but she felt like crying out. "It's not like that at all. Maulana is in pain. He won't return to the madrasa, to the school. He won't teach you again. Don't you see? Don't you feel his grief?" Maulana now spent most of his time in his study, writing letters and poems to Shams. At times he went out to inquire whether anyone had heard about his friend. He asked the travellers, "Have you heard about a man called Shams? Shams-ad-Din of Tabriz? Have you seen him?" None of them had. He begged them, and some out of pity said that perhaps they had seen a man who looked like Shams. Then, for a few hours, Maulana revived until the pain overwhelmed him again. Those were the times when Kimya came and sat beside him. Sometimes she took hold of his hand and buried her cheek in its palm. Then he would smile and say, "Kimya, oh Kimya, why has he gone?" And she thought of the roses of Tabriz and their bleeding hearts. A few old students came to sit at the feet of their master. He looked at them absently. His life seemed to have gone out of him. "Maulana's house has turned into a tomb," the students reported. "Maulana's eyes have lost their light." And this was true. Happiness had deserted the house. Even little Alim muffled his voice and stopped running around the house as if afraid of the heaviness that crushed the walls, while Kara worried because Maulana once again refused to eat. Weeks and months elapsed. Life was as if suspended, autumn came, then winter, until one morning Kimya woke up to an insistent bird which sent a high, cheerful note past her window. A sudden certainty came upon her. Shams will soon be back. Later on, she said to Kara, Shams is getting ready. It will be only a little longer now. Kara didn't question her assertion. Maulana will be glad, she said simply, and they looked at each other, overjoying the way women have of knowing things. The same day, a traveller from Syria knocked at the door with the news that Shams had been seen in Damascus a few weeks earlier. He was playing chess with a Frankish monk near the great mosque. And you know who that monk was? It was none but Saint Francis of Assisi. Soon a letter was sent, and from Damascus a message arrived in return. The rays of the sun may be obscured by clouds, but the light of the sun still illuminates the earth, said the message. The rose may be hidden to the eye, that the wind still carries its fragrance. Don't you know that whatever the heart may feel, souls never stop conversing? It is time to say goodbye. I can't believe how fast this hour has been. I would like to leave you with my favorite quotes about birds by Rumi. It says, "Make my heart, O heart of the universe, a divine bird that nests only on the throne of God." And with these amazing words, I leave you, my dear, dear listeners, and hope to meet you again next week to a new edition of Sufi Voices. And I bid you farewell, ma salama, namaste, and may you have an amazing, amazing week ahead. And please remember to notice the beauty of the birds and to fly like a bird. And look beyond your worries and concern. See the big picture. Look at life from a bird's point of view. Up to the sky, not down to the ground like an ant, working, 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 saving, 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 rushing, rushing, rushing. Let's all remember to be birds this week. I'm Wafa, and you tuned in to Oneness Talk Radio. One world, one voice. Expand your vision.